Hello, I'm Daniel, and welcome back to the Library of Ideas, created by the team of the Academy and Institute for Scientific and Educational Thought. This is the second episode of The Universal History of Civilizations. Last time, we watched humanity take its first hesitant steps from wandering to permanence. Today, we follow those footsteps into the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, the place where memory hardened into clay and the world learned how to build itself. This is Mesopotamia, the first cities of the world. Clay and water, the birth of the city. Between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the rivers rose and fell with a rhythm no one could predict. The floods destroyed fields, then blessed them with black silt. Around 4000 BCE, people began to trust that rhythm, or at least to bargain with it. They built dikes and canals, turning chaos into order. From that pact between water and will, the first cities emerged: Eridu, Uruk, Lagash. The city was not born from ambition. It was born from persistence. A cluster of huts became workshops. Workshops became districts. Smoke from kilns filled the air, mingled with the scent of drying clay. The same hands that once built shelters now built permanence. Brick by brick, the temporary became eternal. In this new world, the day of a child was a lesson in imitation. Boys followed their fathers to the canals, learning how to lift the silt and read the color of water to guess its depth. Girls stayed near the hearths, grinding grain, shaping clay jars, caring for younger siblings. Their toys were fragments of the adult world: miniature baskets, small cattle carved from bone, crude figurines of mothers and gods. They learned early that the settlement itself was the classroom. Every act had rhythm, every season a rule. Women carried the city's continuity. They tended gardens near irrigation channels, brewed beer, spun wool, and guarded the granaries when men were away. Their labor was invisible but constant, feeding not only the household but the whole settlement. Some became priestesses, keepers of the shrine, mediating between the domestic and the divine. In the clay figurines of full-bodied goddesses, we can still see their echo: fertility as both work and worship. Warriors existed, but barely. They were not conquerors. They were protectors. A few men with spears stood watch when floods broke walls or strangers arrived by boat. Their courage was practical, not glorious. These were farmers who fought only when survival demanded it. The real power belonged to the Council of Elders and the High Priest, those who could read the heavens and ration the grain. Rule was not domination. It was coordination, ritual, not command. At dusk, smoke rose from 100 hearths. Families sat beside the canals, eating bread and lentils, listening to flutes carved from reeds. Children slept to the chorus of frogs and distant hammers. No one called this civilization yet, but its pulse was already there: the hum of work, of habit, of a world learning to stay still. Uruk, Eridu, Lagash. Their names would survive for millennia, and yet their first citizens never sought immortality. They only wanted to live beside the water, to keep it flowing just long enough to make tomorrow predictable. In doing so, they invented the city and the quiet captivity of order.
Sometimes thought needs silence to unfold. If these ideas find a place in you, perhaps stay a little longer. Subscribe and walk with the Library of Ideas. There's much more waiting beyond this page. Let's turn it together. In a moment.
We go to Uruk, the beating heart of ancient Mesopotamia, where faith and mathematics first shook hands. This is the story of the Temple of Measures, when gods became accountants. In the center of Uruk, where the river divided into a web of canals, rose a new kind of building, neither home nor fortress, but something between heaven and earth. Its whitewashed walls caught the sunlight. Its terraces smelled of smoke, grain, and incense. The people called it Iana, the house of heaven. Yet it was made of the same clay as their houses. Only its purpose was different. Here, the gods learned to count. By 3300 BCE, the temple had become the city's heart. It stored grain, received offerings, managed herds, and distributed rations. The priests taught that the gods desired all things to pass through sacred hands, and the people believed them, for order itself had become divine. Around its courtyards, scribes sat cross-legged in the shade, pressing reeds into wet clay. These were the world's first accountants, their fingers shaping the script we call cuneiform. They wrote not poetry, but quantities: how much barley was delivered, how many sheep were owed, how many jars of oil consumed during the feast of Inanna. Every mark carried weight. Memory, once spoken in stories, was now trapped in tablets. What had once been trust became verification. Inside the temple, hierarchy was law. The high priest, clothed in blue linen, dyed with crushed stone, presided over both rituals and ledgers. His assistants managed the granaries and workshops. Below them, women ground flour and brewed beer for offerings. Children carried water, swept floors, fed sacred goats. Even the lowest worker served the divine bureaucracy. Outside, the city pulsed to its rhythm. Merchants from Elam and Kish arrived with lapis lazuli, copper, and timber. They paid temple fees to trade within its walls. Weavers and potters marked their goods with small clay seals, the ancestors of signatures, to prove payment. Weighed silver became the first currency of faith. Every transaction was witnessed, recorded, sanctified. For farmers, the temple was both protector and creditor. It lent seed grain before planting, demanded repayment after harvest, and blamed the debtor when floods destroyed the fields. The gods, the priests said, must never go hungry. A man who could not repay offered labor instead. Thus began the oldest contract in history: work for redemption. Even the festivals were measured. The calendar, once fluid and lunar, hardened into fixed cycles: planting, reaping, tithing, sacrifice. Time itself was scheduled, counted, owned. At night, when torches flickered against the mud brick walls, the scribes stacked the day's tablets to dry. Their marks glowed faintly in the firelight, symbols of grain, oxen, and human submission. The high priest stood above them, eyes lifted to the stars, reciting hymns that kept the cosmos aligned. Yet even he knew the truth. The gods no longer lived in the wind or the river. They lived in the numbers. As clay cooled into stone, the world cooled into structure. What began as worship had become administration. And the divine voice, once thunder and rain, now spoke in tallies. By the 3rd millennium BCE, the plains between the Tigris and Euphrates no longer belonged to the gods. They belonged to rulers who claimed to speak in their name. The city had become a state. Lagash and Amma rose like fortified islands in a sea of mud, each surrounded by canals, each defended by walls. The temple, once the heart of faith, now pulsed in rhythm with the palace. Religion and rule had fused into a single bureaucracy of obligation. Eanatum of Lagash called himself King of Kish, King of the Four Quarters. His soldiers, farmers turned warriors, marched beneath the banners of the god Ningirsu, conquering the neighboring fields. Victory was not glory, it was inventory. Sacks of barley, herds of goats, lists of names impressed on clay. Each conquest expanded the ledger. From his reign survives the stele of the vultures, carved around 2450 BCE. Half him, half accounting record, half threat. Below the walls, the people worked as always, tilling, weaving, shaping. But now, the grain they harvested no longer belonged to them. Each worker owed the temple or the palace, seed, rent, or labor. Jews were counted by scribes trained in the temple schools. The marks they made had become law. It was Uruk, also of Lagash, who first tried to soften the burden. Around 2350 BCE, he proclaimed reforms, cancelling some debts, forbidding temple officials from seizing peasants' property. His clay tablets spoke of justice for the orphan and the widow, perhaps the oldest political promise ever made. And yet, even his mercy was an entry in the record. To define fairness was already to control it. A century later, the kings of Ur inherited that vision of rule. Ur-Nammu, around 2100 BCE, ordered that laws be written and displayed in public. His code, older than Hammurabi's, set fixed penalties: 1 shekel for assault, 5 for theft, death for certain lies. The scribes etched morality into clay. Guilt had become measurable. In every market, the rhythm of exchange echoed the rhythm of rule. A merchant owed taxes to the palace. A farmer owed barley to the temple. A worker owed days of labor to repair canals. A slave, born of debt, owed his life. Even the priests owed obedience to the calendar. Every relationship was debt, and every debt a link in the chain of order. At night, under oil lamps, scribes like Illum, nameless except in their marks, pressed their reeds into clay. One tablet tells of a man who failed to repay a loan of barley and lost his field, his ox, his son. The priest called it divine justice. The scribe simply recorded the numbers. By 1750 BCE, when Hammurabi ruled Babylon, law had become an empire unto itself. His code, 282 clauses engraved on black stone, promised to make justice visible in the land. Yet beneath its perfection lay the same arithmetic: rank, restitution, hierarchy. Justice was measured in silver, not mercy. Thus the gift of order hardened into burden. What began as cooperation became calculation. The clay that once recorded faith now preserved obedience. And between the king, the scribe, and the debtor stretched the first invisible empire, one built not of walls, but of rules. The ziggurat of Ur rises from the desert like the spine of a forgotten god. Its steps, once bright with blue glaze, are now worn by centuries of wind. I stand at its base, brushing sand from a fragment of clay. The marks are still clear, wedges pressed by a steady hand 4,000 years ago. They record not a poem, not a prayer, but numbers: grain, sheep, oil. Even in ruin, the city remembers what it owed. This was Ur, the home of Ur-Nammu, the king who, around 2100 BCE, built this mountain of brick and carved his laws into clay so that the strong may not harm the weak. The intention was noble, the method eternal. To bring justice, one must first count. Further north lay Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh, the first man in history to ask why power cannot bring peace. His legend speaks of walls and temples, of a flood sent to punish arrogance. The story of Atrahasis, older still, whispers the same warning, that when humanity learns to measure creation, it begins to test its limits. I look across the plain, where the Euphrates once flowed. The canals are gone, the fields are dust, but the geometry of order remains. Each ruin marks a question. Did civilization begin as triumph or as confession? The first cities gave us writing, architecture, and law, but also hierarchy, debt, and the fear of forgetting. The clay tablets still hold our reflection. They were made to preserve truth, yet they preserved anxiety instead. The dread that without records, we would disappear. And so, to secure memory, humanity built its first bureaucracy. Here, among the bones of I can almost hear their echo, the faint rustle of reeds pressed into wet clay, the quiet moment when reason learned to keep accounts. Thank you for joining me, Daniel, in this journey through the world's first cities. Next time, we travel west to the banks of the Nile, Egypt, where eternity became government. That episode premieres this Saturday, here at the Library of Ideas, created by the Academy and Institute for Scientific and Educational Thought. And remember, every Wednesday, a new chapter awaits in our other series, The History of Economics in 25 Scenes. Until then, may your thoughts wander as freely as the rivers that once shaped the world.